Hey everyone. Looks like everything's running smoothly and we got bonus Pete today. Yeah. There we go. He finally came up to say hi. Although he's staying weirdly far from the microphone, unfortunately. Welcome everybody. Thank you for there he is. He's like right in the way. Thank you guys so much for your patience today. I am so sorry that things got a little bit delayed. I was trying to figure out how to set it up so that I could have a waiting room of sorts, and it got very messy and confusing on the back end of things. So apologies for that, but we're here now, and we are good to get started. And Pete is just like putting his face in the ring light. I feel like I should turn that down ever so slightly. He's shoving his face in it, and he just looks like Angel Cat. It's very cute. I feel like I should have hidden the piles of books on my floor too, but alas, it is what it is. And I hope Pete will make more of a visit, more of an appearance here, because yeah, everyone loves cats on the internet, right? Come here, sweetie. There we go. So we are today, like I mentioned in the tweet, you're just going to go over there. Okay. He's been sleeping all day and now he's awake. What I mentioned in the tweets and everything today when I was kind of getting everything set up is today we are going to be talking about actually probably my favorite facet about fighting for space, which if you are new here, of course, is the book that I currently have out. It is available. I hope they're working this week. I have links in the description of where to get the book. It's available on Amazon through your local booksellers. And that was a great time to be supporting your local booksellers, as well as an ebook and an audiobook as narrated by me. So you can get that anywhere. And this is part of my live book tour because obviously with COVID-19 and everything, there are no real book tours happening. So this is me, instead of giving the same talk in various locations, I'm giving different talks in the same location, that location being right here on my YouTube channel. We're just going to adjust this a tiny bit. Okay, there we go. So welcome. This is stop 4. And one of my favorite things about this book is this woman right here. This is Jackie Cochran. So for those who don't know, I'm just going to dive right in. For those of you who don't know, I'll give a little bit about the book and then we'll get into Jackie. The book is kind of a dual biography of Jackie Cochran and Jerry Cobb, two women who were accomplished pilots in their own right, but who also were kind of in this interesting position in the transition between, in America's transition, I should say, from aviation to spaceflight, in that Jerry wanted to be the first woman in space, and Jackie was, without question, the most qualified to be that role, or to fill that role, rather, but was too old and medically unfit. So the two of them ended up battling out, really, for control of a female spaceflight program that did not exist. And that's really what the book is about. And a lot of it is about Jackie, in part because she is the older of the two women. She was born in 1906, but also because she's involved in so much of the story. She's really the one who's kind of the driving factor behind everything. She knew everybody. She knew Randy Lovelace, who was doing the medical testing that Jerry took, who gave her the impression she was qualified to be an astronaut. She knew LBJ, who was vice president at the time. She knew everyone. So really the story is kind of her story. And because of that, I spend a lot of time going through I'm going to put this up here so you can see it and I cannot hold it. I spent a lot of time in the book really going through her background and trying to understand her as a woman so that you understand her motivations when we get to the issue of women in space and why she maybe wasn't vocally supportive of women in space. Now, Jackie is a really interesting character to deal with, and not character or figure. She is very real. She's a very interesting woman to deal with because she was so prolific in everything that she did. She was the most decorated pilot of the 20th century, and she hit more records, more accolades, more awards than any pilot, male, female, American, international. Pete's nipping at my feet. She's this stunningly accomplished woman, which makes her a lot of fun to dive into because you get all of the facets of who she was. Oh, good. I did turn that on. But she's also very complicated because she's sort of like, she's the woman who breaks barriers for women, but also doesn't want to openly be supportive of women. It looks like she's really complicated in a lot of ways. So one thing I wanted to do in the book is really kind of go into her true backstory. So we're going to do this in two parts here. And almost like if you want to follow along, unfortunately, I still haven't figured out how to like do a screen. I don't want to share my full screen, but I want to be able to show pictures. I can't do that yet. I haven't figured that out. So I have a few things to show you guys. But if you want to follow along with pictures, the link that's in the description of the Medium article, that one has pictures in it that you guys can look at and kind of follow along to illustrate exactly who we are talking about. So the interesting thing with Jackie. All right. Jackie. Jackie learned to fly as an adult when she was 26 years old in 1932, and she got her license in 17 days, which is incredible, unheard of, and within 3 days flew to an air meet in Canada. She flew up to Montreal from New York, and that was insane for a woman with a 3-day-old license in her pocketbook to not only fly internationally, but to not die in the process. So she was in a local newspaper in Toronto. I don't know why Toronto and not Montreal, but anyways, she got in the newspaper, and that was kind of her first little bit of fame. And as she started to become more known, as her name started to become more synonymous with not only record-setting aviation, but women in aviation, her backstory started to appear. And the story that she told was that she was born to parents that didn't want her, so she was raised an orphan. She was thrust upon a foster family who she never names, and was kind of like the unloved burden that this family took on. And they never loved her. They were a poor mill family, so they just moved from mill town to mill town when one mill, ran out of work and they needed something new. And she ended up having to kind of find her own way out through the beauty industry. So her backstory, and this, I should say, is the story that she tells in her first memoirs. Let's make sure I don't have glare on that, because it's got that library thing. In The Stars at Noon, this was her book that she published in 1954 in advance of her congressional run. The story that she told was that she was never educated. She hated school. Trying to get her to go to school was just got her in fights with her foster mother. When she did finally go to school, she had one teacher who actually taught her things like how to style her hair, how to take care of herself, how to wear her dresses properly, how to brush her teeth with a branch from a gum tree, and kind of gave her the idea that she could aspire to a better life for herself. And really kind of beauty was the way she saw as kind of a potential way out. But she ended up working in a mill. She worked in a cotton mill, replacing bobbins and sewing machines so that weavers never had to stop actually working. But when her mill went on strike, when she was 11 years old, she ended up leaving the mill to work for a family, the Rickleys. They owned 3 beauty parlors in this town of Baghdad, Florida, as well as a beauty supply store, and they had 3 kids, and they were Orthodox Jews. So Jackie, this 11-year-old Jackie, learned how to cook kosher food, care for children that were not much younger than she was, and also learned how to set hair, mix dyes and transformations, and learned how to run a business of a salon. And she was actually quite good at it. She tells a lot of really funny stories, not like ha-ha funny, but she would look at the women who would come into the store in, nice dresses, clearly women who had money. And because they were referred to as madam, she assumed that the house they discussed these women owning were schoolhouses. And of course, they were madams in a brothel. But the madams ended up becoming kind of guides for young Jackie, telling her, learn a trade and get out. Learn something, learn a skill that you can use and get out. So that's exactly what she did. She leveraged, one job in a beauty parlor to the next job in another beauty parlor and kind of bounced around a little bit, and eventually, tried all kinds of things. She at one point sold dress patterns on the road up the East Coast to about just kind of the lower half of the East Coast in the U.S., liked it, but couldn't make enough money at it. She tried beauty school, but her teachers couldn't teach her anything she didn't know, so she felt like it was a waste of money. She tried owning a salon, but her business partner was so not good at running a business that it was just a headache, and she sold her part in this small beauty shop in Pensacola, Florida, and ultimately decided in 1929 that she wanted to leave, that she wanted a new start. And because her industry was the beauty industry, she wanted to go to the epicenter of beauty, which was New York. So, it's this amazing story. This young girl, she's in her early 20s at this point, packs up her life, rides a train, and when she gets to New York, she just never looks back. The story that she tells and the story that she writes in her memoirs is that when she left Florida, she never wanted to look back on the foster family who had never cared for her and had been neglectful, almost to the point of abusive with her. And she didn't even want to have their name anymore because it was never her name. She tells the story that she ran her finger down a column in a phone book and landed on the name Cochran and liked it. So she kept it. And that's how she became Jackie Cochran. It's a really great story. And when that story started coming out in the 1930s, 1940s, when Jackie started to become more known and famous even, it really did a lot to further her image, right? She was this, completely poor little girl who had absolutely nothing, was working in mills when she was 10 years old, and had found a way to pull herself up by her bootstraps to become not only she made a lot of money in the beauty industry. So, sorry, I should say this first. She moved to New York in 1929, right before the market crashed, but she was so good at doing beauty that her clients were the wealthy wives of the wealthy men who weren't losing money. So she was actually able to sort of ride on the fringes of this kind of upper echelon of society. And it was honestly the furthest she could get from this poor girl. She describes her dresses were flour sacks. This little girl who wore flour sacks and had no shoes is now drinking with her friends who are some of the richest people in America during the Depression. So the story really makes her sound like this incredible, enterprising, strong woman who, even as a child, knew how to take care of herself, knew how to get what she needed out of her own life. And it really is kind of this inspirational story, especially the idea that she didn't know her family. And that was the story, like I said, was in all the newspapers. It really started to kind of grow. I don't want to say the cult of personality around her, but really started to grow her image. And it was confirmed. Everything was sort of, made firm in The Stars at Noon. When she wrote it, she starts the book saying, where does she start the book? She starts the book saying, I am a refugee of Sawdust Road. Until I was 8, I had no shoes. My bed was usually a pallet on the floor and sometimes just the floor. Food at best consisted of the barest essentials. No butter, no sugar. My dresses in the first 7 years of my life were usually made from cast-off flour sacks. So if she writes it, it's got to be true, right? Right? It wasn't true. It was partially true. So this is where Jackie becomes such an interesting figure, because who hides so much of their background? So, okay, the story that Jackie told is not entirely made up, but it's got a lot of fictionalized elements to it, we shall say. She did, in fact, grow up very poor in the Florida Panhandle. Her father was actually her biological father. She did know, I have a visual aid for this. She did know her biological family. They were not her foster family at all. But he was a mill worker. They were fairly poor, but not nearly as poor as she describes. So Jackie's talking about having absolutely no money. Oh, wait, I should do this first because we're going to make things really fun and we're going to switch names. She also goes into great detail in The Stars at Noon to say that she doesn't know her real family. She doesn't even know her real name. Like I said, her foster father was not her foster father. It was just her biological father. His name was Ira Pittman and her name was Bessie Pittman. So we're going to call her Bessie for a while. Yeah, it gets fun. So Jackie's version of the story says they were super poor, had nothing, and were bouncing around trying to find work at mill towns. The Pittmans were poor, but they weren't the level of poor that Jackie would have you believe. They did have dresses, but, you know, they would have one dress that they could get a new one when they outgrew it, and probably a Sunday good dress. She had shoes. There are pictures of her as about a 3 or 4-year-old wearing what looked to be pretty good leather shoes. They were poor in that they had one pair of shoes until they outgrew or wore out the pair of shoes. Her father was actually a foreman in a mill, so made a decent amount of money. The other thing Jackie doesn't talk about is the Pittmans were in these mill towns. There was a very strong feeling of love thy neighbor. And Molly Pittman, Bessie's mother, was very religious and really firmly believed in this idea of helping neighbors, that when you are losing something, when you don't have enough food, when you have extra food, you share it with people who are also in need. So the Pittmans were poor, but they probably wouldn't have known that they were poor because they had as much as anybody else. So they moved around from town to town. They ended up at one point, like I said, in this town called Baghdad in Florida, which is where a lumber mill was. So Ira was working at a lumber mill, and this was where Bessie did work in a cotton mill. But they weren't so poor that they had nothing. They actually had an electric light in their house at that point. Again, Ira was making decent enough money that they were able to afford some things. Nevertheless, it is true that Bessie would kind of watch the adult ladies. She calls them the fancy ladies, which I think is really sweet. She'd watch the fancy ladies. She would look at their clothing and want to dress like them. She would go to the millinery and look at the fancy hats and just love the design. It all gave her this idea of wanting more from her life. And another thing that that Jackie writes about that is true from Bessie's life is that she did not get along with her mother. So there's a great story, and I put it in Fighting for Space, which is propping up Stars at Noon, so I won't hold it up again. Bessie and Molly would there's a motorcycle. Bessie and Molly would frequently get into very heated debates about Bessie not going to school. She didn't want to go to school. She, these one-room schoolhouses, she had no interest. She wanted to be left alone, to wander around town, to watch the women in their clothes, to read the names of foreign cities on boxcars. That's actually how she kind of learned to read. But her mother would force her. And at one point, it came to blows, and Bessie, realized that she could almost threaten her mother with violence and win an argument. So the two of them were actually quite similar, which is why they didn't get along. They were both very headstrong, very stubborn, and very quick to anger. And you put those two things together, not to mention Bessie's the youngest of 5. And there was a lot of clashing between mother and daughter. So Bessie kind of found a lot of wanting to be on her own. And this is where she kind of fell under the of her teacher, Miss Bostwick, or who she recalls being named Miss Bostwick. That is a very hard fact to confirm. But Miss Bostwick, who taught her how to style her hair, how to brush her teeth, how to take baths, all of that stuff. She really found these role models in other places. And Bessie did work in the mill, and she did work for the Rickleys. And she bounced around between salons a lot more than Jackie admits. She wasn't just living in Florida at the time, kind of going from Milltown to Milltown in the Panhandle with the family trying to find work in a salon. She was going between Georgia and Alabama and Florida. So she was really moving a decent amount all around the South. And a lot of it was she would wear her hair up and try to pass herself off as being older than she was. So she would try to pass herself off to employers as 16 or 17 when she was 12 and 13. At some point, she got a car. I don't really know when that happened. Definitely she was older when she got a car, but she was moving around a lot. And considering how much Jackie discusses hating her family in the Stars at Noon, Bessie actually supported her family when she started working in the salons. She was making a decent amount of money. For the time, she was making something between, I need to look up the conversion, but she was making like $10 to $15 a week in 1919. So that's enough to support a family. So what she would do was send half or three quarters back to her mom to support her and her dad, to help her siblings out who were, some of them were getting married and having kids of their own, basically to support the Pittman clan. And then she would keep half or a quarter for herself, because she realized really quickly that money was power and was freedom, that if she could afford to go to a new city, she could afford to find a new life. And that's kind of where I think the kind of, I don't want to call it dissociation, but where like she started making a separation between herself and her family. But she ended up really going back to her family in a big way when she was 14. So like I said, she would wear her hair up and style herself to look older than she was. And when she was 14 years old, she caught the attention of a traveling salesman, a machinist by trade, named Robert Cochran. So sidebar, that's where the name Cochran comes from. She did not pick it out of a phone book at all. And we'll talk more about the name in a minute. She met Robert Cochran, and she's 14, he's 24, and within weeks, she's pregnant. And you don't have a baby out of wedlock in 1920 in small town Florida. So they got married when she was 14 and he was 24. So within, months of their marriage, and I think right before she turned 15, she gave birth to a son, Robert Cochran Jr. And I can't imagine being in that situation, but she moved back home with her parents. At this point, they were living in Defuniak Springs, Florida. She moved back home with her parents. They spent a little bit of time in Noma, Florida with Robert's parents, and then they moved to Miami. She was working in a salon again. I have no idea what Robert Cochran was doing in this whole thing. Who knows? But the marriage, I think largely because of how young she was and how probably unprepared either of them were to be parents, the marriage did not stay happy for very long. Bessie, sorry. Bessie would frequently go to work and just not mention the fact that she was married or had a kid. She could be seen around town kind of not engaging in anything, but being a little bit flirty with some of the much older men in town. She would reportedly kind of leverage that to get help buying cars and stuff. Meanwhile, Robert Cochran was having an affair with a younger woman, older than Bessie, but younger than him. So Bessie actually tried to file for divorce. She was unable to prove his infidelity, so her divorce filings were thrown out. But she nevertheless left him in Miami and took Robert Jr. back to Defuniak Springs and left her son with her parents and went to Alabama to work in a salon, ostensibly as a young single woman who did not have a child or a missing husband. And this went on for 4 years. Sometimes they were together, sometimes they were not. Sometimes Bessie would live with a host who would kind of take her in. Sometimes she would live with her mother and father. Sometimes she would live with her oldest brother, Joseph. Bessie really liked Joseph. They were very similar and got along really well. And she also really liked, I need to check her name, Joseph's wife, Ethel May, who Bessie started to look at as almost like half sister-in-law, half mother figure. She was kind of, Ethel May was kind of the polar opposite of Molly, Bessie's mother. She was very patient, very kind. She taught Bessie how to do cross-stitching. She taught her how to cook. She already knew how to cook, but kind of furthered her cooking lessons, taught her sewing, and really supported her. The other thing Ethel May did for Bessie was help her with her grammar and her spelling. Bessie had dropped out of school after the 2nd grade because she had to work in the mill, never had formal education beyond that, and was very self-conscious of her inability to express herself in writing. She actually did try to go for a nursing degree at one point, or a program. She took the program. She did learn everything, but she could not read or write well enough to actually sit the exam. So went back to hairdressing. So every time Bessie wanted to, work for a new place, when she started investing in other businesses, she would always have Ethel May edit her letters. Even if she had to send them to Ethel May, have them fixed, send them back, and then copy it out again to have a clean copy. So Ethel May became a really strong influence on Bessie, and that family, Joseph and Ethel May, became a really strong grounding for her. So Pete Conrad, he's playing with the cabinets. So this whole thing going on is there's a lot happening in young Bessie's life, and a lot more is about to happen. There's one day her son Robert Jr. was with her parents, or staying with her parents, Molly and Ira. Molly was home alone with him, and Robert Jr. was left to play alone outside in the backyard. And somehow he found a match. He got hold of a match and managed to light it on fire, and it caught some paper on fire. No one knows why this stuff was outside or why he was able to get a hold of it. The fire very quickly jumped from this piece of paper that he was playing with to his clothing, and he was very quickly just engulfed in flames. And he was 5. He didn't have words to describe what was happening or the idea of don't play with fire. He screamed, and a neighbor actually heard him before anyone else. This woman rushed over, tried to take his clothes off to protect him from burning more, burned herself badly in the process. By the time Molly called a physician and got Bessie back, she was at work. There was nothing to be done for Robert Jr. He was kept comfortable for the rest of the day. He actually regained consciousness that afternoon. It was in May, I think, of 1921. He regained consciousness long enough to tell Bessie what had happened, and then he died by the end of the day. And 2 days later, Bessie had to bury her son, and she was not yet 21 years old. So things kind of go from really bad to even worse for Bessie, because remember, she had tried to file for divorce from Robert Cochran, but she couldn't prove that he was going around with other women. Well, he decided to file for divorce himself, citing that she was going around with other women. And whether or not he had proof is unclear, but I was actually able to find their divorce record. So I know that this happened and that this went through finally in 1927. So this was just after Bessie turned 21, because I think she had to be 21 to, there's something about she had to be 21 or over 21 to present herself in court for a divorce. The divorce accused her of adultery. So now she's the bad guy, even though they were both not great to each other. Less than 2 years after she buried her son, she got a divorce, and she was just 21. Not long after, so this whole time, Bessie is bouncing around between Alabama. She's living with an aunt in Alabama. She's going back to Florida. She's in Georgia for other salons. She doesn't really have roots anywhere. Her whole family at one point comes down with influenza. There's this is not the Spanish flu of 1917. This is later. Her whole family gets sick, so Bessie has to go home to work close to home so she can take care of them, because remember, she did have this nursing experience, and she was able to nurse her sisters and her mother back to health, but her father, Ira, died, so she had to bury her father very close to her son. And then a few months after that, her younger brother, well, she's the youngest, but the younger of her 2 brothers, Henry, was killed in an accident. He was working with the Coast Guard, and he was killed, so she had to bury him as well. All of this before she was 24. So you start to understand why she wanted a very clean break from her past. It got to the point where she's this young woman and her entire life has just been sadness. The family that she has left, her siblings are married with their own kids. She's very close to her brother, but he's raising his own family. The siblings she's not very close with are raising their own families. Her mother's there. Her mother's alone and could use help, but she doesn't get along with her mother, and they've always kind of been, to quote Milhouse Van Houten, 2 positively charged ions. She's got no one left. Her son is dead. Her husband's divorced her. She needs a change. So I actually, I know this is not the best. in a live thing, but I do actually just want to read a very small passage from Fighting for Space because it's one of my favorite parts of this that I wrote. And I just kind of want to I just want to sum up the final transition from Bessie to Jackie, because I think this does it better than I can possibly do it off the top of my head. All right. So, between Robert Jr.'s death and her divorce, Defuniak Springs held more pain than happiness for Bessie. It was time to move again, this time to Mobile, Alabama, where her Aunt Amanda had a spare room near another salon. But within a year, Bessie was back in Defuniak Springs. Her whole family had fallen ill with influenza and needed her care. Her sisters Mamie and Myrtle survived, but her father didn't. Bessie helped the family bury Ira in the local cemetery close to Robert Jr. Her brother Henry died not long after in a Coast Guard accident, and she buried him too. When she left town again, she didn't go far, just 8 miles west to Pensacola, where there were high-end salons, and it was a short drive home. Pensacola failed to cure Bessie's malaise. In the span of a decade, she'd been married and divorced, welcomed a son, then buried him. She had buried her father and her brother. Her sisters and beloved brother Joseph were all raising their own families, and the only family Bessie had left was her mother, with whom she continued to clash. Defuniak Springs held nothing but painful memories for Bessie. She decided it was time to make a clean break. One midsummer day in 1929, 23-year-old Bessie arrived at a train station in Pensacola. Her worldly possessions were packed into suitcases, and her life savings was tucked away in her pocketbook, including the money she'd gained from selling her Ford Model T. She bought a ticket and boarded a train heading north. Watching the countryside stream past the window, she decided to reinvent her past. She would tell people she was an orphan, that the Pittmans had taken her in but had never really cared for her. This would explain her lack of family ties. She would never admit to knowing her biological family and would instead tell people that her foster parents, Molly and Ira, had been so poor and unloving that she had been forced to leave the house at 11 years old to find work. She also decided never to tell anyone about her marriage or her son, though she couldn't bear to erase Robert Jr. entirely. He was her happiest memory. She needed to keep him with her somehow, so decided to keep the only thing she had left that they had shared, a name. She would remain a Cochran to keep her little boy alive in her heart, though she would tell people she'd picked the surname at random, running her finger through a phone book. As the train sped further north, Bessie Pittman faded into obscurity. When she arrived in New York City days later, she retained Bessie's skill as a hairdresser and nurse, her obsession with cleanliness, and her moxie, but nothing else. No one would ever know Bessie Pittman, she decided, but the world would absolutely know Miss Jacqueline Cochran. So, let's talk about the name Jacqueline. Where did that even come from? Because there's no connection, right? We have the connection for Cochran as the surname. There are a few theories on where Jacqueline comes from. So, and then I'll tell you a little bit about where these theories come from, because they're not mine. The two theories are that she was very fond of a preacher in her hometown in Defuniak Springs named Jack, and she took inspiration from him. And some people actually recalled that before she left, and she was still Bessie Cochran, she would actually sign her name Jack, almost like she was trying on the name to see if she liked it. Another theory is that she heard the name Jacqueline somewhere and really liked how sophisticated it sounded compared to Bessie. So I think the selection of Jackie was really just a name that she liked because she liked the sound of Jacqueline as a name. There's no obvious connection to anything like really strong of her past on that one. So after Bessie Pittman becomes Jackie Cochran, she doesn't actually make a clean break with her family, which is really interesting because that's kind of what she would lead you to believe in her own books and the way she talks about her family. She actually kept in very close touch with her family. Not long after she started flying, she's already gaining some celebrity around the world, or around America, and very quickly the world. She goes back to Florida and she left in the state of sadness and depression, and she returns a celebrity. She's suddenly not only the girl from Defuniak Springs who got out, she is the girl who is now this world famous name. Her family is excited. They all come out to watch her land her plane, because she obviously flies herself everywhere immediately after getting her license. When she goes to buy groceries and she goes to visit a local merchant and she pays by check, they don't cash it. They just give her the stuff, and then they take the check and run around and say, look, the famous Jackie Cochran was at my store. She becomes the celebrity. And there's a great story from one of her nieces, one of her brother Joseph's daughters, that one day she went back to visit and stay with them for a while, and she lined up all the kids and said, I changed my name. I'm not Aunt Bessie anymore. I'm Aunt Jackie. And none of the kids, what do the kids care? She's still their aunt. None of them cared. They said, you want to be Jackie? Now you're Aunt Jackie. And that was the end of it. She even took, unfortunately, these are pictures. If you're following along, with the pictures in the Medium article, the last couple pictures in there, she took one of her nieces, her niece Gwen, on a summer of flying around the country even. And this is so interesting to me. So I'll kind of transition this a little bit into kind of my research and how I discovered everything about Bessie and kind of where I draw these conclusions from. But I wish I could share this. I found these pictures of a young Jackie, very clearly sort of, mid to late 1930s, probably mid 30s, with this young girl who's unidentified. And reading more from the family side of things, it seems that this is her niece, Gwen. She wanted to take one of her nieces out for a flight for a month, just like, let me show you the world. She was very partial to Joseph's family and took one of Joseph's daughters. So I think she had this idea. She seemed to be very drawn more to her nieces than her nephews a little bit. She was supposed to take her oldest niece, who couldn't go for some reason, so she took her younger sister. And the two of them flew around the country together for a month. And this young girl, Gwen, was 13 or 14 at the time. She met all kinds of people and saw all kinds of things. She was in a plane when Jackie made a bit of a crash landing in a field, but was fine, so it's okay. She felt really strongly about keeping family ties and sharing this with her family. Jackie married Floyd Odlum, this very interesting character in himself. He was one of the richest men in the country, one of the 10 richest men in the country when they met in 1932. In 1935, they started building what became the Cochran Odlum Ranch in Indio, California, and in 1936, they were married. When they started building the ranch, Jackie actually paid Floyd paid, because let's be honest, it was always his money. Jackie paid to have Joseph's whole family and a couple other nieces and nephews come out to California to give them a job in construction for as long as they wanted to be there, but also to have them close by. And it just ended up being that they all kind of felt uncomfortable with the arrangement. They were there for a couple months, but ended up going back to Florida. Jackie would go visit Florida and bring gifts for her family. She would bring, toys for the kids, clothes, a lot of clothes. She was very, very into fashion a lot. I mean, she had a cosmetics industry. I mean, this is a big part of her. She would bring her mother the latest, even though she didn't get along with her mother. She'd bring Molly the latest fashions from New York, whether it was, a really nice, simple sweater set, or there's like the family stories of this chinchilla fur coat that was just so extravagant for someone in Defuniak Springs, Florida to own. So such an interesting thing that she denied having this family, but was still very involved. So what did the family think of her? Well, when she started telling the orphan story in the 1930s and 40s, they didn't really care. They kind of knew, the Bessie they knew was very into drama and very into kind of creating stories. I almost chalk this up to being the youngest child and having to entertain herself a lot. So they kind of figured, she got out, she changed her name, she wants to kind of be this other version of herself. Like, we'll honor that. That's fine. Because all of them said, it matters more to us that she still visits, that she writes, that she calls when they got phones, that she cares about the kids, she brings them gifts and is involved in their lives, that her actions are speaking louder than her lack of words. It wasn't until she wrote the story in The Stars at Noon and like publicly denied ever having a family, that it became an issue for the Pittmans. The siblings at that point did actually confront her, and there's very little record of this confrontation. It wasn't like, we're going to blow your story wide open. It was, why are you doing this? It wasn't a mean-spirited confrontation. It was this hurts all of us. Jackie refused to acknowledge Bessie Pittman's existence and kept to the story. And it was finally, 20 some years after she left Defuniak Springs, finally started to cause a real rift within her family. But by then, this was 1954. She's won all the awards. She's led the Women's Air Force Service pilots in the war. She has just become the first woman to break the sound barrier. She's friends with the president. She's running for Congress. I feel like she made the decision of which part of her life she wanted to honor instead of trying to merge the two. Because what damage would it do to her public persona to suddenly have this whole other side of her life unveiled? So did anyone ever find out? Well, this I thought was really interesting when I was researching. So let me walk you guys through a little bit how I came to write about Bessie Pittman, because it was really like, when you use this as your starting point for her story, it's like, we all know memoirs are self-serving. We all know that they, especially when you're writing it because you're running for politics, or running for office / engaged in politics, it's doing something for you. This is cementing the image that she wanted to be for her voters effectively. When you start with this and you notice that things don't line up, you're like, well, that doesn't work. So I started digging around other biographies of Jackie. And what becomes really interesting is how many other biographies of Jackie just go with this story. It was like, it's wild. I don't know when the name Bessie Pittman came out. I think it might have been in the 80s. I think it was after her death, because I haven't been able to track down like the first usage of it in like modern era, as it were. But there are definitely books that go with this version of the story. Actually, the other day on Facebook, I don't know why, but some Air Force history page had posted something about Jackie Cochran, saying, the little orphan who grew up in a foster family, and it was everything I could do to not be like, actually, because I don't want to be that person. But, so many sources still use this as the backstory because it happened before 1929, and it's so hard to find records of that time. So I found this book, and I would recommend this book if you want just like a straight up play-by-play of Jackie's life, called Jackie Cochran by Doris Rich. Doris Rich is an aviation historian. She's written also a great book about Amelia Earhart, but this is the one that really started unpacking some of the Bessie Pittman stuff. And it was starting to come a little bit clearer, but it still felt a little bit piecemealy. So this was the one that was like, okay, there's more. I have to dig so much more. So I hunt on eBay a lot. When we talk about Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics, which, let me check my schedule, is next week. We are talking about the Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics Company. I have a ton of like things, like this is a compact from her makeup line. So in hunting on eBay, I found this book, which was a self-published book that does not seem to exist, called Superwoman by Billy Pittman Ayers, who is one of Jackie's nieces. And all of a sudden, the world of Bessie Pittman made sense. And it was so interesting. It was so interesting to read the story of Jackie from her niece's perspective. This book was written in the late 90s. Billy Pittman, unfortunately, she passed in 2000, so I could definitely not get a hold of her. I did try to email her. The first thing I did when I saw the email address in the back of the book was try to get in touch with her, but nope. The publisher does not seem to exist anymore even. So was not able to actually track her down to speak to anybody. But she, between the stuff that she found, that she remembers from interviewing relatives and interviewing neighbors, 70 years later, but their remembrances of Bessie Pittman, putting that together with the things that Jackie writes about in her memoirs, these two things start to create a picture. And having Doris Rich did some amazing archival research in Florida archives, these three things together filled in a lot of the blanks. And then I was able to find a few like random pieces here and there. So like I said, I found the divorce record. So this is actually, I love finding nerdy clerks in places. I got in touch with the circuit courthouse in Montgomery, Alabama, where that was the county in which Bessie Pittman and Robert Cochran were married, so where they filed for divorce. And I found a clerk who was like super excited about what I was trying to do, and he got me a copy of their divorce record, which is like the coolest thing ever to find. Now, it's incomplete, unfortunately, and I'm actually honestly amazed that you could do it because I am not a blood relative, although everyone is dead and there's no surviving family, so there's some wiggle room there. But to be able to see, it's the only time I've ever seen her name written as Bessie Cochran, which I thought was very interesting. But to see the filing date, to see everything, the complaints, everything signed, it's such an interesting thing that, like, when I found this, made it very real. And I just thought this is such an amazing piece. And that clerk that I spoke to on the phone was so excited. It was very cute. But even just kind of having, unfortunately, there's questions here. Did you, on or about this date, obtain a letter? What did it contain? This? I don't have the answers to the questions, but I have all the questions they were asked when they filed for divorce, which does tell me some information about Bessie's life during the marriage, before the divorce, leading up to it. So this actually, it's 6 pages long, filled in a lot of details, which was really fun. The other thing I did, and I am so sorry that I can't share the images, but when I went to the Eisenhower Library to research Jackie, because all of her papers are there, she also has a massive trove of images that are there. And I went through everything, and I bought, you can buy scans. I bought scans of a number of them, but more, I also just took pictures on my phone of ones that I just thought would be good to have for reference. So it's really interesting. I was able to find a picture of a baby that is also in the Billy Pittman heirs book. So now I can identify the baby as Robert Cochran. So I unknowingly have these pictures of Bessie's child and these pictures of some people with Bessie's child who are unidentified, but knowing the ages of everyone, I can kind of figure it out. So the other thing I did, and I'm going to share this with you guys, because this is how much I got into hunting down the family history of Billy. This is Bessie Pittman. I actually wrote out, you can't see it because of the light, but I actually wrote out her entire family tree. So this is what I used to try to keep track of where she was and who she was involved with. So this is Molly. Molly and I are at the top under my nose here. And then the siblings from oldest, Joseph's over here, to Bessie is over here. And then when she turns into Jackie, she also turns red. So that's her second marriage to Floyd, and trying to trace where their family was, birth dates, death dates, because Billy Pittman she'll discuss an event saying it was about 2 years before this, and I was this many years old. Therefore, I can figure out roughly when they were born. So looking at the old pictures, knowing that I have this picture of Robert Cochran Jr., I can now say, well, this is probably one of her sisters or a family friend or her grandmother, because this woman looks too old to be Molly. So there's a lot of like digging into things and trying to figure out exactly like who was where when to get the story straight, because it was just insane to try to figure out, like, you can't tell Jackie's story and just ignore the fact that she made up her backstory. Because what to me, her making up her own backstory says so much about how badly she wanted to be Jackie Cochran, and kind of creates this stronger feeling of her attachment to her attachment to the persona that she created, because Jackie really is a persona, I think. And I think she got the freedom to live that persona to the fullest extent, through, finding success as a pilot, but also finding a husband who could facilitate all that. So it became this really, really interesting, like, okay, we have to go through all the details. So honestly, the first chapter of my book is my favorite. And I spent so much time on it. I just caught a question. Ray, thank you. I appreciate you appreciating my due diligence in this. Because the first chapter was such, I thought, so important to set the grounding, to understand Jackie, to understand where she came from, how much she went through at a young age, why she created this hard and fast separation between her life as Bessie and her life as Jackie, to understand why she behaved the way she did when she, testified against women in space. You kind of understand her actions as a woman when you understand her background as a girl. And I thought it was so interesting and so important. And I signed up for every genealogy website possible, and all of them think I am a Cochran, because I was trying to find the death certificates. It's so hard from that era, but I found reports of Robert Cochran's death. I did find Robert Cochran Sr. married someone else. There was an interview with him when someone asked, do you regret divorcing Bessie because of who she became? And he's like, no. But interestingly, if they hadn't gotten divorced, I don't think Bessie would have become Jackie Cochran. Everything that happened in her early life formed her into that woman. Billy, in this book, Billy talks or relays a story from her younger sister. Oh, I have to remember whose sister's with whom. She relays a story from Gwen, the niece who went on the round the country flight in the 30s with Jackie, saying that there was one year Jackie came back. She was Jackie at this point, and they went to go visit the family graves in Defuniak Springs, and she saw Robert Cochran's little heart-shaped tombstone and just dissolved into tears and ran off into the woods crying. And her brother Joseph had to go and coax her out. And it took a long time. She had a breakdown in this cemetery looking at her son's grave. And when she came back, Gwen remembers her saying to Joseph, I want to actually quote this to make sure I get it right. But she said something along the lines of, if only he had lived, my life would be so different. And I think that's kind of the crux of everything here, is if she got into the situation of having a family and having a child so young, if he hadn't died and they'd still gotten a divorce, it would have been problematic for her. It would have changed her life, but she still wouldn't have she probably wouldn't have picked up and left and reinvented herself. If they hadn't gotten a divorce, she would definitely in 1929 not have picked up and left. I mean, it's something that just wasn't common then. And I think all of the pain and all of the struggle that she went through as a young woman formed her into this tough as nails adult. And you start to understand why she was how she was because of everything she went through. So there's so much that I love in the first chapter of this book, and try to tie it into her as an adult to kind of show you just how much these formative experiences mattered for her. So I think that's everything. I'm trying to think if I have anything else to share in terms of artifacts or anything, but I don't think so. So yeah, that's the story of Bessie Pittman becoming Jackie Cochran, and it's just so good. I love it. I don't know. There was something, I had so much fun going through all the genealogy sites and really trying to find the family ties, hence the scroll to keep them all straight. But it was just I'd lay it all out, and I was like, it's such an interesting look into someone else's past to understand who they became. And I've done it with my own family a little bit. I actually just tried to request my grandfather's military records, but it's going to take a long time. Okay, so we're going into questions. If you have questions, I do have I need water before we keep going because I've been talking for 54 minutes. Okay, So if you do have questions, I have a behind the scenes helper. Thank you. Figuring out questions for me. So definitely leave them in the chat. I will try to see what I can. But I have a list of questions here. So we're going to go, I'm going to prioritize the ones that are kind of about the book. And at the end, we'll do like the super fast round of general space and whatever. So hopefully I get to your questions. If not, you can always leave a question when the video is live. And I can answer that because I can't answer anything from chat. I'm learning about this whole live stream thing. But first off, I do want to thank some of you guys gave some donations during my talk. So I really, really want to thank you guys so much. I can't tell you how much it means to me to have so much support from this community of, space and history people. So in no specific order and going by screen names, 80s horror fan, Martin Van Gorp. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Ray, who has been doing a lot of kind of pushing people to get the word out. Michael Sullivan, Trashman4444, Alan McMillan, Adam Daggy, hello, and Ray, who has also been, I already commented on that, but who's been doing a lot to kind of promote this. Sorry, I just realized I read your name twice. Thank you guys so much for your support. It really does mean a lot. And Trashman asked, with spiderweb shirts, Halloween my favorite holiday by any chance? It's like, no, not really. I'm not a huge Halloween person, but I love the geometric patterns of spiderwebs. I'm actually terrified of spiders, but the spider web I find to be a very pleasing geometric shape. Okay. So let's look at community questions from you guys relevant to the book and the story of Jackie and Bessie. Dan asked, this is still not clarified when or how Jackie's past as Bessie became known, or at least outside her hometown. It must have been posthumous that her family let it become public knowledge. This one's hard, and I talked a little bit about how hard it is to figure out when the first mention of Bessie Pittman in newspapers is. I actually did try to look. I tried to look kind of specifically around 1954, 1958, I think was my parameters, because that's when Jackie was running for Congress. So, if anyone is going to dig into your background and find something, it's going to be when you are pursuing politics. That's kind of how this works. That's why you write the book, Jackie's book. That's why you write the book, so that you get your own story straight and you control your own message, right? I was actually really surprised that no one found Bessie. No one found Robert Cochran. No one found Robert Cochran Jr. What I did find, there were a couple of papers. Sorry, there were a couple of papers that mentioned it. There were a couple of papers that mentioned she was from Phoenix Springs, that there were family that were claiming her as their own. But a lot of those reports were from local papers in Phoenix Springs. They didn't get out beyond that small town. I forget what the current population is. I did look it up. I actually looked at the Google Maps. I think I figured out where her family plot is. Once quarantine ends and we can travel again, I want to get an event in Florida so I can go. Very curious. Sidebar, Jackie actually replaced all of her family's headstones before she died because she wanted to kind of have something nicer for them, but she did not replace Robert Cochran's Jr.'s. I think it was still too painful for her. So all of the reports of people knowing about Bessie Cochran or Bessie Pittman when she was Jackie Cochran didn't seem to gain any traction because they were small town papers or they were just not reliable enough sources. You have a woman named Molly Pittman claiming that this famous pilot is her daughter when her own book says I'm an orphan. I think it's tough. And in a non-digital age, looking at records that were barely kept, how are you going to verify that? So it does become quite hard. And I don't think it was something that was easily done. And it weirdly never came out when she was pursuing politics. Okay. Dan, this is okay. Good. I just wrote a note to myself on this one. Dan asked, was Jackie's letter to Floyd released? So when Jackie and Floyd got married in 1936, one of Jackie's wedding presents to Floyd was a letter that she said came from a private investigator with all of the available background that this person could find about her real history. She claimed she knew nothing about her parentage. She claimed she knew nothing about where she came from. She claimed that this was an investigative report about who she was. And she gave it to Floyd. It was sealed with a coin and wax so that if he wanted to know more about the woman he was marrying, he could open it. She gave it to him, and he gave it right back. And this is in the book. She gave it to him. He gave it right back and said, I don't need to know who you ever were. All I need to know is who you are. And that's really sweet. And Jackie put the letter away and she kept it. And the story goes that after Floyd died in 1976, it was still unopened in Jackie's papers. And when Chuck Yeager, who was a co-executor of Floyd's estate with Jackie, when they found the letter, it was still unopened. And Chuck asked, do you want to open it? Do you want to read it? Do you need this? And she just shook her head. So he burned it. So unless there's more to that story that is not publicly known, I don't know. And probably the people that do know, maybe Chuck Yeager knows, but would probably be past. I don't believe that Floyd ever knew anything about Jackie's full past. They were living between New York and Indio when they were building the ranch. It's possible that he paid for workers to live on site and didn't know they were Jackie's family. And she was overseeing things in California while he's running the world in New York. He might never have met them. So it's unclear to me, and I kind of want to look through Floyd's papers and see if I can find anything out of curiosity. I don't think Floyd ever knew about Bessie Pittman. I don't think Floyd knew, maybe he did, but again, no clear record that he knew about Robert Cochran, Jr. or Sr. And that letter, as far as I know, was never released. Okay. K001 Daddy asked, is it that Jackie wanted to be an astronaut but not want any other woman to be one? If so, was it greed or jealousy? So, flashing forward in Jackie's life, she did speak out against a woman in space program / Jerry Cobb being the first woman in space because she wanted to see a very methodic series of tests about women as astronauts, which I get. I think she was onto something there. It's hard to tell whether it was jealousy or what was really motivating her. I think a lot of it was knowing, I think it was part jealousy, part that she wanted to do it. She couldn't, so she would at least be the decider. If she couldn't be the woman, she wanted to be in charge of the women who were maybe going. That she couldn't be, that Jerry was kind of running off on her own without Jackie's approval, I think probably definitely irked her a bit. So I think it's in part like a personal issue with Jerry. The letters that I have in here show just how much they were like not fans of each other. I think it's in part a personal dislike of Jerry and in part wanting to control a program. So there's a lot of going on there. Okay, Daniel Balkwell asked why Jackie's pictures are in the Eisenhower Library. And you also asked if the divorce papers are signed Bessie Cochran. Okay, so first, Jackie's papers are in the Eisenhower Library because she was very good friends with Eisenhower. He actually wrote his memoirs, or one of his memoirs, at her house in one of the guest houses. So when she died, both she and Floyd, there's no like Jackie Cochran Foundation or anything. They both bequeathed everything they had that survived, because Jackie actually destroyed some of the financial papers. Everything that survived, they sent to the Eisenhower Library as per his and her wishes. It's a gift. So it's all there, which is great, because I can go through it all, which has been really fun. So as for the divorce record, it's the copy that I have, the documents that I have are not signed. They're signed by the solicitors. If I can actually kind of show this. It does say Robert, was it L? Robert H, right, Robert H. Cochran and Bessie Cochran. So this was the first and only document that I've seen that actually has Bessie Cochran at it. So I kind of, when I was writing about her, I thought, my mother never changed her name when she got married. So I still don't necessarily think about women changing names when they get married. Like, it's just, it's not a, I mean, friends have done it, but it's, in my mind, I'm like, well, she got married. She was Bessie Pittman and she got married. I'm like, of course she'd be Bessie Cochran. This like was like the duh moment for me. It was like, of course she was Bessie Cochran. Of course that's where the name came from. Like it all like so much clicked when I saw it written out like this. That really helped me. So good question. Okay. William Hannah asked, how was someone with a rudimentary education able to read the highly technical documents related to aircraft that she flew? Very good question. So Jackie does discuss, tell the story that in her life as Bessie, she bought a car, or potentially one of her man friends bought it for her. It's unclear. His name may have been Will Meggs. She got this Ford Model T. She wanted to be able to take care of it herself so she wouldn't have to worry about anything. And she couldn't read the manual. And she acknowledges that she could not read the manual. It was just like, might as well have been a foreign language to her. So what she did was she opened up the hood and she studied the car. And she asked questions and she memorized how it worked. And she did the same thing in nursing. She couldn't read well enough to really understand how a surgical procedure worked. She couldn't really read to understand how all the instruments had to be laid out, but she could memorize what was happening. So she committed the stuff to memory. I think that's a big part of it. She committed it to memory. And she also like pushed herself to learn as she went. So I think, she wasn't illiterate, but she definitely had issues with reading comprehension, I think, a little bit. But as she learned more and more, she read things, she would ask questions, and she would slowly gather more information. That said, when she took her initial pilot's license in 1932, she was allowed to actually take the written exam orally because she couldn't speak. She couldn't write well enough, but she could speak it. So they reasoned, it's fine if you can't write it down, but you know it, then you know it. You've proved that you know it. You don't need to be able to read and write brilliantly to be a pilot. You need to know how planes work. So that's great. But yeah, it was, she had this ability to understand technological thinking and also this drive to learn it. Okay. What style of pilot was she? In the early days, so this is from Brett H. What style of pilot was she? In the early days, did she set out with expensive maps or did she just get the gas station maps like Howard Hughes famously did? She learned by doing. Just saw a donation come in from Allie Jarts. Thank you so much. Hello. Do appreciate your support. Thank you very much. It means a lot. Okay, so there is a story in here that Jackie tells. 3 days after she got her license, I mentioned to you guys earlier, she went to an air meet in Montreal. She was flying from New York she's flying over a border. She landed in Vermont. She'd followed a river. I don't remember which river, but she followed a river from this airport up to Vermont, landed, refueled, and asked the guy at the airport, point me to Montreal. And he's like, what are you talking about? She's like, point me to Montreal. And he's like, well, you have to follow this heading on your compass. Depending on winds, you go this way. And she looks at him and she said, why can't you just point me? I don't know how to read a compass. And he's like, you don't know how to read a compass? How did you get here? She's like, I followed the river. And he's like, how long have you been flying? She's like, 3 days. And that was her first moment of like, maybe I should learn how to do stuff. So this was her first time she ever learned how to read a compass, was during this flight to Montreal. She's sitting in the plane. She has 4 guys from this airport in Vermont take the wing and the tail and the nose and spin the plane right there on the ground. And she looks at the needle and the needle's going like this. And she's like, oh, it tells me where my nose is pointing. Oh God, I don't know anything about compasses. She made it in one piece, but she had to have landmarks. So she really kind of, in part it was because she was learning in the early 30s when there weren't a lot of instruments, but also she was learning in these small planes where you're not going high enough up. She was always flying in view of an airport, so she could do it. And, that flight told her she had to learn how to read a compass. There was one day early in her and Floyd's relationship, she was flying him somewhere, I forget where, but they got into a storm and he was terrified. He didn't like to fly at all, but he was terrified. He pretended to take a nap so that he could not make her nervous. And meanwhile, she's sitting there freaking out because she's like, I'm in a storm. I know where my compass is. I don't know where I am. And, that's when she realized she didn't know how to fly by instruments. So she learned that. So she was very much like a little bit fly by the seat of your pants until your pants aren't there for you. Okay, James Blagg, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asked, how was the leap made from early life to flying and fame? Seems quite a leap. I assume you mean Bessie's leap from unknown hairdresser to Jackie Cochran, unknown hairdresser to Jackie Cochran, award-winning aviatrix. And people have asked about this. I like words with X's in them, which is why I like aviatrix as a word. Also, it's very much in the era. I think Jackie was really excited by fame when she started to get write-ups in newspapers. She got really excited, and she learned, if a newspaper is going to say, write me up as a society pilot, I have to get more records to show that I'm not. Like, she liked having an image to manage. So I think between, a little bit of early fame just by virtue of being a woman flying in the early 1930s, then coupled with Floyd's ability to facilitate her taking on these big air races. One of her first air races was in 1934. She learned to fly in 1932. And she didn't just take on a small little, air race locally. She entered the MacArthur, which was an air race. She was the first one. Oh, my audio is popping, apparently. I'm going to keep going. Let me know if it drops out. And if it does, we will unfortunately have to start a new stream again. So her first big air race was the MacArthur from London to Australia, which is no small feat. And it was the first time this was a huge race, and she had to drop out in Budapest, actually, or Hungary. And it's better now? Okay. She had to drop out in Eastern Europe because her plane was acting up and it was kind of terrible. And she still made headlines because of it. And she was still this exciting idea of a woman taking on this international air race in the early 30s. So I think the transition was less a leap for her, so much as a natural fallout of her being in this new arena. And actually, a side note on that flight, when she had this really, it was in Hungary. She had this really interesting experience where she was forced out of this race because her plane was acting up. She took a train from Hungary to Romania to somewhere else, and was stopped and demanded that they show her papers because she apparently looked like a jewel thief who was known to be traveling at the time. And she was arrested overnight. And what she had as her proof of identity was a newspaper headline showing her dropping out of the race with a picture. So that became her literal get out of jail free card. And she was so shaken by this experience, she actually wrote to her mother for support. So again, all this stuff is happening. She's still leaning on family. Explorer Map asked, do you believe her instructor really let her land the plane on her very first flight? So I tell the story in here. On her very first time up, Husky Lulin, who was her teacher, took her up for like a teaser lesson just to kind of show her the ropes of what a plane kind of did, how it feels. And still getting audio. Took her up for this kind of teaser flight. And at some, she's, I say this, I've never flown. Apparently, once you get up in the air, you can kind of do the, manipulating the stick and you can fly it. Landing and taking off is significantly harder than just kind of tilting a wing. You can let a kid tilt a wing into little, we're talking little small, Wacos or something here. We're not talking jets. So she was apparently adept enough that he allowed her to land, and he was there, and I think he might have. I don't see any reason why she would make this story up. She makes up tons of stuff. I totally see why she'd make it up, but I think it's reasonable the way she tells it, that there would have been a cockpit in front and in the back. And if she's flying in the back, he can actually supersede her in his cockpit. So, if she's going, he can just say, stop, hands off, and then he'll jump in and save the day. It might have been that he was like bored of teaser lessons and wanted something exciting, and like maybe a woman would be fun. Not like maybe almost killing, that sounds really bad. It's mean like letting her try to land and have it be this dramatic thing where he has to jump in and save the day might be exciting. And we're also, again, we're talking these little planes. If they land a little bit hard and they bounce, you're probably not getting hurt. So I think it's possible that is actually a true story. In this book, a lot of it, I had to trust Jackie on a lot of things. And I do have the caveat in the author's note that I have to, I can't verify every single thing that she said, especially her conversations with Floyd. There's no record that exists of some of these things. We're trusting Miss Cochran to kind of have at least some reality. The big things I made sure to verify. The little things I kind of let her, I honor the way she saw herself. She invented her own personality. Like, she clearly invented herself. I'm honoring who she wanted to be, because I think that's also, honestly, that was really important for me, was to honor both how she and Jerry see themselves. Okay, we got another question from James, who designed the book cover. It was my publisher. Ta-da! That's all I have for that. Went through, I tweaked it a little bit, actually. I moved this board so Jackie's arm was on it, not at her wrist, but on her elbow. And I cut I don't know if you can see it. I cut Jerry's head up over this so that it looked like the overlap was deliberate, but like it came from my publisher. There was like a couple of versions, but it was pretty, all things considered, pretty quick in the scheme of all of the things. Okay, let me look. Oh, we got another donation from Kevin Oviat. Thank you so much, Kevin. I really, really appreciate your support. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Okay, we have a couple other book questions. Daniel Balkwell asked, Bessie Pittman Cosmetics. Okay, wait, this is just a comment. I like this, though. Bessie Pittman Cosmetics does not have the same effect as Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics. I agree. And Ray, who's a member, who brought up that the idea of legal name is very transient before 1935 with the advent of Social Security. Yes, I think that's actually one of the reasons she was able to just kind of become Jackie Cochran, because the family birth and death records were kept at the time. It was actually considered a legal record for the matriarch of a family to keep them in her Bible. So every time Ira Pittman picked up and moved the family, the first thing she was make sure she had the Bible, because the Bible had the birthdays, the death days, and the names of all of the kids, all of their spouses, all of those kids. That became the family record. So, she has a marriage license. I couldn't find the marriage license. I actually did try to find it. But she has a divorce record under Bessie Cochran. This might have been the closest to a legal thing. Like, even if she had a driver's license, I feel like in 1929, you could say, I lost it. I need a new one. This is my name. It's definitely different. In an anecdotal sense, my grandfather changed our last name. We don't know how legally it went, but it was in the 40s or 30s, and he just kind of changed it. Marriage licenses at the time were one of the only form of identity that you had. And if your family vouches for you and your name, that's your name. So it's a really interesting, there's probably a good history there that I just don't know, but it is interesting. But I think the lack of like intense record holding in the 30s and 20s is why it was so easy for her to just become someone else. Because name changing is not the hardest of the legal things do, depending on what you're doing. People do it all the time when they get married, but it's still, it's at this point, everything's tied to your credit cards. It's a mess. Bessie Cochran didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. She had like a bag with some money in it somewhere, probably. Okay, we've got, sorry, looking through my questions, we've got relevant book questions. Okay. Okay. Needed some water. Okay, Explorer Map brought up a story from Jackie that is interesting. So, in the 1938 Bendix flight, I think, hang on, I have this, so I'm going to share it with you guys because I happen to have it right here. Flying this plane, this is a Swarovski. I think it was actually this plane. If not, it was another model of this plane. In 1938 Bendix, she flew a Swarovski and ran into some problems. It's actually a great story. She took off. It was heavy. It was one of the first planes to have fuel tanks in the wings as well as the body. So she was able to actually flip between the belly tank. Like, I point to myself like I'm a plane, the belly tank and the wing tanks. But when she started flying, she realized that her right wing tank was not draining. So if your right wing isn't draining, it's heavy. So she's flying in a bank. So she tried to switch it to the belly and back to try to like force to drain it. And it ended up pulling her into a dive. And she got out of that dive. She had to like do this flying thing where she's sort of like flying like this to try to forcibly drain the wing. There was something blocking the fuel line. It turned out to be a wad of paper. She had to fly like this to drain this wing that wasn't draining and then level out and then fly and then level out. And it became this, this dance. She describes it and it sounds horrifying and terrifying. She's in a storm and breathing through oxygen and her lips are frozen. It's wild. And she won. But Explorer Map asked, flying with one wing higher than the other would cause the plane to turn and lose height. Yes. So because she's flying in this, I feel like I should do it with the picture. Because she's flying in this bank, she was losing height and she was turning, and that was why she ended up doing this like fly at an angle, straighten out, fly at an angle, straighten out, which would still, you would think, kind of bring you off. She had to manage, what she ended up doing on that flight was managing her heading and her fuel load, like picking one, going between one and the other. So she would manage her fuel load for a bit, turn this way, and then fly, like go up and like level out and come back, and then this way. So it was very much like, she describes it as a zigzagging flight. And it was not perfect. It did add to her time and it did cost her some fuel, but she had enough fuel in reserve that she was still able to make it to Cleveland, which was where the Bendix ended, on time and made it. So yeah, no, it was an interesting flight. And there's a lot of like messy mechanics coming into that. We did get another donation, Lucky 17 for the belly tank. Thank you. I'm glad my awkward, bad sense of humor makes you guys smile. Thank you so much, Lucky 17, for that donation. It means so much. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys' support. Okay. So now I think we're into the secondary questions section of the Q&A here. So again, if there's more, keep them coming. I will probably go for another 15 or so minutes because my voice is starting to go. Don't understand people who can do this all day. It's amazing to me. Owen Sharp asked if I'm going to do more breakdowns of For All Mankind. Someone asked me that. It might have been you that asked me that on Twitter the other day, and I saw it and I was like, oh, I forgot about that show. So we watched it all. It got to the point where I was just like, I don't even want to continue with this. So I might do one just because people have been asking for like the conclusion of that rant that I started with that. In short, like the short version is I didn't love the show. There's elements that I liked and I thought it was went in some really interesting directions at a few points, but at the end of the day, like every character was defined by their issue and I don't really know anyone's names. And a lot of it was just like, what is happening right now? So I would probably do like the last 6 episodes or whatever in one, because like just don't even want to go into it episode by episode. Eventually I'll probably do it. Where's the Apollo 13? Great name. I didn't want to do intense Apollo 13 stuff this year because I am in the middle of this kind of virtual book tour and trying to kind of get this thing going. So I posted some stuff on Twitter about Apollo 13. I posted some threads of images, but that's all I'm doing this year. I did everything for the 45th. So I have videos. I should post the videos, but New Magnificent, wow, I can words. New Magnificent said, I love how this is basically science class for kids during quarantine. Cheers. If any of you guys do have kids that are watching, I hope this is useful for giving you some educational content that you cannot feel guilty plopping your kids down in front of to watch. Hi, kids. We just got another one. James Blagg asked, am I watching the daily YouTube Apollo 13 press conferences? It seems like they weren't quite horrified at times as we have become since. I haven't been keeping up too much with it. I've seen a bit. I mean, I've seen a lot of this stuff when I was researching it in previous years. But the interesting thing with Apollo 13 is, yeah, they were very chill. I've known, or I don't want to say that I know, but I've met Jerry Griffin, who was a flight director on Apollo and technical advisor on the movie. And he told me the story that when he first met with Tom Hanks, Ron Howard, I think Brian Glazer was there maybe, and Jim Lovell and Dave Scott, who was also the other technical advisor on that movie. They met in Mission Control to discuss Apollo 13, and they were telling it, and they're like, well, we did our jobs. Like, we knew what we had. We knew it was good. We knew it was bad. We did our jobs. And Jerry told me he left that meeting thinking, like, there's no movie here. It just wasn't dramatic. So all of the, like, people walking really fast in the background of the movie, that was all put in to make it feel more dramatic. So I'm not surprised that you look at the press conferences and they seem like almost flat. So yeah, it's interesting. It is really interesting how we kind of like have put this more dramatic spin on the story, because it is really dramatic, but it wasn't necessarily that dramatic at the time in terms of like what they put out there. Rock Height Man 2001 asked if there was a famous Black female American pilot named Bessie who learned to fly in Europe. Oh, she's in my intro. Oh my God, what is her last name? You're right, though. I'm going to look this up. Oh, what is her name? All I can think of is Bessie Pittman. There is a Bessie. I'm sorry, guys. We're into the portion of the live stream where I flip through pages live on camera. Ta-da! What was Bessie? Bessie Coleman. Bessie Coleman. So I mentioned Bessie Coleman in the intro because she was one of the first women. I think she was actually the first Black woman to be licensed as a pilot in the United States, but she couldn't learn to fly in the US. She actually had to go to France, where she had there were fewer, I shouldn't say no, but there were fewer racial barriers to women wanting to fly. Bessie Coleman, she was one of the big female pilots in the 1920s. I think she died in 1926. She died quite early. She was flying. She was women were huge draws in kind of these barnstorming events where people would come and line up to watch women fly, watch wing walkers. And they loved her. Like, she came back to America and was like magically famous. It was interesting, but she was flying. I don't think I wrote about her death, but she was flying. And I think she was doing some maneuver or some barrel roll or something, and she fell. And she died in that accident. So unfortunately, she had a very short but really interesting career. Okay, Stephen Zumbo asked, did Apollo 13 crew bring back their PLSS? I know that 2 of the suits are in museums. Wondered if the 3rd came back. I think so. I don't know where it is, though. Sorry. I don't have a good answer for that one. I think so. I'd have to look up like where these things are. Yeah, I don't know. Off the top of my head. I don't know how to pronounce these. Hi, truck outside. One of my favorite people in aviation history discussed by one of my favorite space historians. I am so glad. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you've enjoyed this talk. We'll try one more time. These. Okay, Rajat Sharma asks, can I do a video on the only Indian cosmonaut, Rakesh Sharma, who went to space in the 80s with the Russians? Yeah, I actually, and I have no idea if you maybe are asking because I did a very interesting book club event actually this morning with a group in India. There were a couple other nations, people calling in from other nations. But it was so cool for me to start my day talking to this awesome group of people on the other side of the world. And they were asking, I wrote it down because I've always called the Indian Space Agency, the ISRO, ISRO. So I started thinking about ISRO today and kind of want to dig in a little bit more on that. So it might be something that I get into, but anything that's kind of not book related might be down the line. But definitely something that I think is like worth getting into for sure. I'm got super curious on it after my talk this morning. So it's definitely something I want to look into. Okay, we are just looking for any related comments. Okay, I think. Okay, so I'm just going through. I have some notes from you guys that have been compiled for me. Suggestion of a second monitor to do screen shares, because I'm just not the most technologically inclined. I know there's ways to do it. I'm using the native YouTube streamer thing, and I'm still learning how to use it because this is like my 5th ever live stream on a desktop. So I'm still learning. Okay. Okay, there's a lot. Okay, I do have the note. I have the note here. People are obsessed with this woman. You get comments about her a lot. Poncho Barnes. I know she's on the list, guys. Poncho Barnes is on the list. I'm gonna do this. I feel like there's not a single person in here who doesn't know who Poncho is. Poncho Barnes was one of the notable women of aviation. She's roughly in Jackie's time frame. Also, I think she won some awards. I'm not sure. I don't know too much about Poncho's history. She's kind of most known as being the owner and bartender at the Happy Bottom Riding Club, which was the bar at Edwards Air Force Base. Poncho was one of the boys, exactly like Jackie was one of the boys, and the two of them did not get along. So what I want to do is again, because of book, I want to kind of tell the Poncho story through the lens of Jackie's interaction with her, because it's very interesting to me that these two very like-minded women got along so poorly, and I think there's something in there. So I'm going to look in, but we're going to talk about Poncho one of these days, guys. We're getting there, because I am curious to know more about kind of the other woman who was right up there, kind of in the boys' club with Jackie. Speaking of, Peter Anderson wonders if Poncho Barnes being the exact photo negative of Jackie was the source of their mutual hatred to each other. Yes. Yeah. I think there's actually a lot of that. There's a couple of comments. I think it actually comes from Chuck Yeager's wife, Glennis, who wrote. So Yeager's memoir that was written, I think it was written with Leo Janis as the co-author, includes sections of other voices, so other people kind of weighing in a little bit. And Glennis Yeager writes a little bit about Poncho and about Jackie, and just writes that, like, Jackie owned a cosmetics company. She took 2 baths a day. She loved fashion. She would always give Glennis Yeager fashion from Paris because Glennis was this tiny little thing. Glennis recalls that Poncho kind of being like just not caring about her personal hygiene at all, like really irked Jackie. She couldn't believe that this woman would just like throw everything away and just want to be like that when she wanted to be away from that so much. So I think there's a lot in there, again, which is why I want to discuss them together. So it's going to happen one of these days. All of the questions I see in the rest of this list are all about Poncho Barnes. So that's, yeah, good. Okay. So I think that's going to do it. Unfortunately, I have lost the ability to connect to my chat, so I can't see if there are more questions, but there's nothing coming through on my end. So I think we're going to call it there. So let me give you guys the spiel of the end of this thing. So like I said in the beginning, this is the virtual book tour for Fighting for Space, which is available now. It is available on Amazon. It is available as an ebook, as an audiobook narrated by me. You can get the physical audiobook. You can do the digital download. You can also get it through your local bookstores most of them are still sending out books. It is a very good time to support local businesses if you can. But the links to the Amazon link is in, I think it's bookshop.org. But the Amazon link is the handy link that I've left in the description. So that one's there. So what I'm doing every week is putting up an article about some facet of the book that is either underexplored in the book or that I want to kind of draw attention to. There will be an article up on my blog at Medium, and then on Thursday afternoon, we'll discuss it in this kind of a live stream. So next week, April 16th, we are doing, today's the 16th. Next week, April 23rd, we are looking at Jacqueline Cochran Cosmetics. On April 30th, we are looking at Astronaut Qualifications. On May 7th, we are doing a trip into the National Archives / I'm going to walk you through some of my research and some of the things that I've found. On May 14th, we're going to look at details that just didn't make it in the book. So this is going to be like a free-for-all with questions about anything that is just kind of neat. On May 21st, we're going to look at Mercury Astronauts on the women, so the women who were taking on NASA to fly in space. And on May 28th, we're going to be looking at women scientist astronauts. So as always, I'll post those ahead of time of the stream. So if you do have questions, you can leave them in the YouTube community tab, on Twitter, on Facebook, wherever you follow me. And I'll try to curate those ahead of time, and we'll also have the stream. If you are not following me on Twitter, that's probably the best place to do it, to find me for updates. Just Amy Shearer title. Also on Instagram, mostly Pete pictures there. Facebook as well. You can follow my page or you can follow my author page. They are basically the same thing. Everything that I do will be there, but Twitter's probably best. If you are not subscribed to this channel and like what you've seen, please do subscribe and tell your friends. People have been asking about regular videos. I am going to start doing regular kind of more traditional episodes for me on the things that we've discussed in these live streams. So you have a shorter way of kind of getting the nuts and bolts down. The other thing, I'm trying to think of everything. I should have written a little list of all the things to tell you guys. We've got the book, we've got the social links. Oh, the other thing that I am now on is Cameo, which is a new thing for me. So if you have someone who's a giant space or aviation nerd in your life who would like a little kind of, smile from something, you can actually book me on Cameo, and I will record a personal video message to your loved one or your friend or someone. We're distant right now. If you want to send a special birthday wish or just a buck up, working from home will end one day, you can find me on Cameo now. I think that's it. The blog is on Medium. It's linked in the description. All the socials are linked in the description. Oh, the one other thing I should mention, my link tree I also did not put in the description. I'll put that in right now, but I have a mailing list now. I will put that link up now. I should have done that first. I just remembered it. But I am starting a mailing list so I can kind of let you guys know if there's anything big happening. They will be infrequent, I promise, because I don't have that much news. I think that's it. Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sticking around and letting me talk to you for an hour and a half. I want to give a special shout out again to everybody who donated during the stream. Thank you so much. I am the freelancer. It does mean a lot. That support does mean a lot to me. And I also want to say hello and thank you to anybody watching who is supporting me on Patreon. Again, that is hugely meaningful and helps so much. You have no idea. So thank you so much. And just everyone who's been watching this video, thank you so much for hanging out and learning a little bit, hopefully having some fun with me this afternoon. And I will see you guys on the internet and live next week. Take care of yourselves. Stay safe and healthy, everybody. Bye.